Isaiah chapter 40 foretells the work of John the Baptist and provides comfort for the nation of Israel. Beginning in verse 3, the prophet talks about a voice of one calling in the wilderness, "Prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God." John the Baptist is going to preach in the Judean desert. To the west, Mount Hebron is about 3,300 feet above sea level, comparable to the Badlands in South Dakota. To the east, the Dead Sea is about 1,300 feet below sea level, the lowest land elevation on Earth. Having a sense of this wide-ranging topography helps you fully appreciate all of the metaphors in the next verse, which says, "Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill made low, the crooked straight, and the rough places plain." This is the great change message. John the Baptist will be preparing the world for an explosion of freedom and reform unlike anything that's come before. And it begs the question, what kind of strength could flatten Mount Hebron and raise the Dead Sea? The answer is in verse 5, which says, "The glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it." If you've ever been to a big concert, you know before the headliner comes on stage, there's often an opening act that prepares the audience for the feature presentation. The same concept is true for the three biggest freedom revolutions in world history. In all three cases, the headliner was set up by an opening act named John. John the Baptist prepared the way for Jesus Christ. John Huss prepared the way for Martin Luther. And our focus today, John Adams, prepared the way for Thomas Jefferson. In the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts, the distance from Braintree, the home of John Adams, to Lexington is 30 miles. That's the same distance as Greenwood to Fishers, so you can imagine the anxiety John Adams felt when war broke out in Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775. 3 weeks later, he arrives as a delegate to the Continental Congress, eager to pass a formal Declaration of Independence. To understand that saga, let's pretend that I go to Friend's Diner in New Whiteland. I order the biscuits and gravy. At Friend's, they serve a plate of biscuits with a bowl of gravy on the side. Next to the sweetener packets on every table are individual containers of jelly. Gravy and jelly share a common purpose of trying to improve the biscuit, but their respective flavors are very different. The same situation was true at Independence Hall, except the contrast between savory and sweet was influenced by religious denomination. John Adams was raised by Congregationalist Puritans. They saw no gray area. If something was wrong, it was completely unacceptable. When his great-grandparents came over on the Mayflower, they set a precedent of taking urgent, daring, and drastic measures to separate themselves from the authorities in England. They were willing to risk it for the biscuit. And John Adams wants the Continental Congress to be willing to do the same. To get the independence ball rolling, he must win over those who, on one hand, agree with him that England is oppressing the colonies, but on the other hand, believe that peace, prudence, and patience are paramount. The leader of that camp was a delegate from Pennsylvania named John Dickinson. He was a farmer, a lawyer, an aristocrat, and one of the wealthiest men in America. Dickinson was in total agreement that England was oppressing the colonies, but he didn't want Congress to make a rash decision in haste. He was in absolutely no hurry. John Dickinson was raised by Quakers. The Quaker tradition values temperance, moderation, self-restraint, being quiet, and being willing to wait on the Lord. Dickinson is very smooth and pleasant, but he's a little too sweet, and he has no meaty oomph. In our analogy of biscuit toppings, John Dickinson is the soft, saccharine jelly. On the other side, John Adams is the gravy. The meaty oomph is there, but he has a little too much pepper, and he comes to the table in such a hurry, he hasn't had time to properly firm up. John Adams is spicy, runny gravy. Screenwriter Kirk Ellis provides a sense of what the back and forth dialogue might have been between these two delegates who agree in principle, but not in practice. Dickinson begins by saying, "One colony cannot be allowed to take its sister colonies headlong into the maelstrom of war. Parliament will be eager to call a halt to hostilities, as are we. We must offer them an olive branch. I move this assembly consider a humble and dutiful petition be dispatched to His Majesty, one that includes a plain statement that the colonies desire immediate negotiation and accommodation of these unhappy disputes, and that we are willing to enter into measures to achieve that reconciliation." Mr. Dickinson, the time for negotiation is past. The actions of the British Army at Lexington and Concord speak plainly enough. If we wish to regain our rights, then we must fight for them. Our rights have been violated, Mr. Adams. That is beyond dispute. We must provide a plan to convince Parliament to restore those rights. Do we wish to become aliens to the mother country? No. We must come to terms with the mother country. No doubt the same ship which carries forth our list of grievances will bring back their redress. Mr. Dickinson, my wife and young children live on the main road to Boston. Should they sit and wait for Gage and his savages to rob them of their home, their possessions, their very lives? No, sir. Powder and artillery are the surest and most infallible conciliatory measures we can adopt. If you exclude the possibility of peace, Mr. Adams, then I tell you no. You have blood on your hands. And I tell you, Mr. Dickinson, that to hold out an olive branch to Britain is a measure of gross imbecility. I sit in judgment of no man's religion, but your Quaker sensibilities do us a gross disservice. It is one thing to turn the other cheek, but to lie down on the ground like a snake and crawl to the seat of power in abject surrender, well, that is quite another thing, sir, and I have no stomach for it, no stomach at all. We will exhaust all peaceful approaches, Mr. Adams, and we will do it with or without the approbation of you and your Boston insurrectionists. Round 1 goes to John Dickinson. On July 5th, 1775, Congress passes his olive branch petition, which was a last-ditch effort to make peace and reconciliation with England. John Adams held his nose and signed the petition, but he was none too pleased. Shortly thereafter, he wrote to a friend saying, "We ought to have established a month ago our own legislative, executive, and judicial branches, our own constitution, and our own navy, among other things." This private letter got intercepted by British officials. The olive branch petition and the news of John Adams's letter arrive in England a month later, August 1775. And I want you to picture King George's staff sorting through the mail. Delta Dental, explanation of benefits. This is not a bill. Trash. Let's see here. Oh. National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Cattle future prices reach record high in second quarter. Fantastic. Let's see, what's this? Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Continental Congress. Most gracious sovereign, our union with the mother country is strong. We have a few concerns that we'd like to work out peacefully, but it is our sincere and fervent prayer that Your Majesty may enjoy a long and prosperous reign over these colonies. XO, XO, smiley face, and a bunch of signatures. Let's see, what's this last one? Return address says John Adams. Hey, his name was on that last thing we read. America should form its own government, its own constitution, and its own navy. Well, as they go to present King George the olive branch petition, he says, "Nope, not interested. I won't even bother reading it." Having been recently notified about the Battle of Bunker Hill, fought in June, King George had just finished writing a proclamation declaring the colonies to be in rebellion. When this proclamation made its way back across the pond, the irony was not lost on John Adams that King George had officially declared the colonies to be in rebellion, but somehow the colonies were refusing to officially declare the same. In that time of frustration and sorrow and waiting, I'm sure John Adams looked to heaven, asking if God could hear his prayers. Returning to Isaiah chapter 40, starting in verse 27, it says, "Why do you complain? Why do you say my way is hidden from the Lord? My cause is disregarded by my God? Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak." Fast forward now to June 28th, 1776. After more than a year of John Adams poking the bear, Thomas Jefferson has written a Declaration of Independence, which is ready for debate. The Continental Congress has decided to try gravy instead of jelly, but at the 11th hour, they're faced with a question: what kind of gravy is this going to be? In this new nation, are we making sausage gravy, or are we making chipped beef SOS? Examining the recipe, delegates can agree on milk, flour, and pepper, but what about the protein ingredient that folks in their area have used for 150 years? If you change it, they will shred the entire document and dash your hopes of ever making gravy again. What's the analogy here? The first draft of Thomas Jefferson's Declaration included language that placed the evils of the slave trade on King George. It said he has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has suppressed every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this execrable commerce, so that this assemblage of horrors might never die. Fearing that the abolition of slavery in America would ruin his region's economy, Mr. Edward Rutledge, a delegate from South Carolina, wanted those lines removed from the Declaration. The playwright Peter Stone helps us imagine what the ensuing debate might have looked like. John Adams says, "There's more to this than a filthy purse string, Rutledge. It is an offense against man and God." Rutledge replies, "Is it really? Then what is that I smell? Could that be the aroma of hypocrisy? For who holds the other end of that filthy purse string? Our northern brethren. They don't keep slaves. Oh, no. But they're willing to be considerable carriers of slaves to others. They're willing. For the shilling. Or haven't you heard, Mr. Adams? Clink, clink. Molasses to rum to slaves. Oh, what a beautiful waltz. You dance with us, we dance with you in molasses and rum and slaves. Who sails the ships out of Boston, laden with Bibles and rum? Who drinks a toast to the Ivory Coast? Hail Africa, the slavers have come. New England with Bibles and rum. And it's off with the rum and the Bibles. Take on the slaves. Clink, clink. Look at the faces in the crowd. New England faces. Seafaring faces. Put them in the ships. Cram them in the ships. Stuff them in the ships. Then farewell to the African coast. Molasses to rum to slaves. 'Tisn't morals, 'tis money that saves. Shall we dance to the sound of the profitable pound in molasses and rum and slaves? Who sails the ships out of Guinea, laden with Bibles and slaves? 'Tis Boston can boast to the West Indies coast. Jamaica, we brung what ye craves. Antigua, Barbados, we brung Bibles and slaves. Hurry, gentlemen, let the auction begin. Molasses to rum to slaves. Who sails the ships back to Boston, laden with gold, see it gleam? Whose fortunes are made in the triangle trade? Slavery, the New England dream. Mr. Adams, I give you a toast. Hail Boston! Hail Charleston! Who stinketh the most? John Adams is speechless. He despises slavery, but his constituents in Massachusetts rely on the shipping profits of the triangle trade. In that time of frustration and sorrow and waiting, I'm sure John Adams looked to heaven, asking if God could hear his prayers. Isaiah chapter 40, verses 30 and 31 say, "Even youths grow tired and weary. Young men shall utterly fall, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." The Bible has 116 references to waiting, but this text in Isaiah is unique among them. It says, "They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength." In this context, the Hebrew word for renew means to exchange. The prophet is saying, they that wait upon the Lord shall exchange their strength. When we wait upon the Lord, there is an exchange of our strength for his strength. Which would you prefer to have? Your strength or his strength? Your strength or the kind of strength that could flatten Mount Hebron and raise the Dead Sea? They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. The NIV translation says they will soar on wings like eagles. Why the reference to this particular bird? Psalm 103:5 says that your youth is renewed like the eagles. Again, in this context, the Hebrew word for renew means to exchange. King David is saying your youth is exchanged like the eagles. A bald eagle has more than 7,000 feathers. Every year it sheds these feathers and grows new ones in their place. By God's perfect wisdom and design, the eagle's molting process occurs symmetrically. If the eagle sheds 3 primary feathers on its right wing, within about 24 hours, it will shed 3 primary feathers on its left wing so that its ability to fly is not compromised. The eagle is renewing itself by exchanging its old feathers for new ones. That's why the scriptures use this bird as a symbol of renewed strength, or more accurately, as a symbol of exchanged strength. In late June 1776, John Adams is forced to swallow perhaps the toughest pill of his life. He's heartbroken knowing that the only path forward for American independence is to yield on the issue of slavery. If the passage condemning this peculiar institution is kept, the Declaration will fail on an up or down vote. The colonies will remain British, and slavery will continue. If the passage is removed, the Declaration will pass on an up or down vote. The colonies will become a sovereign nation, the United States of America. Slavery will continue for now, but perhaps someday this new independent country could at least contain the practice, or, God willing, abolish it entirely. The best ideals of John Adams's upbringing are in conflict. On one hand, he sees the importance of gaining freedom from England, but on the other hand, he knows how unacceptably wrong it is that such freedom won't yet be extended to everyone. This son of radical Puritans must adopt the Quaker virtue of being willing to wait on the Lord. In his desire to liberate those in bondage, John Adams concludes that having hope for a perhaps someday is better than having no hope at all. This hope can only come to fruition by first establishing a new independent country. He begrudgingly agrees to have the passage removed from the Declaration, and thus America was born. John Adams must wait on the Lord and exchange his own strength for God's strength. He himself is not capable of flattening Mount Hebron or raising the Dead Sea or abolishing the evil scourge of slavery, but he knows someone who can. In that time of frustration and sorrow and waiting, in those most painful hours, as John Adams looked to heaven, how could he be sure God would hear his prayers? In our time of frustration and sorrow and waiting, in our most painful hours, when we look to heaven, how can we be sure that God will hear our prayers? I'll leave you with these words from Micah 7:7. Therefore I will look unto the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Amen.